Good morning, Anthem family. I'm delighted to be with you on this Easter Sabbath morning. Sermons begin in different places, at different times, for different reasons. The seed for this sermon was planted in my life over 40 years ago. I was a seminary student at the Adventist Theological Seminary at Andrews University in Berrien Springs, Michigan. As I recall it, I was finishing my first year, or getting around that time of year. I was seated in Pioneer Memorial Church in a worship service when they introduced the new senior pastor for the congregation. I remember sitting there in the pew that day and looking up at the platform and thinking, that guy doesn't look any older than I am. Well, as it turned out, he wasn't all that much older. His name was Dwight Nelson. I tell you that only because if memory serves me correctly, it was somewhere in Dwight's first year there that Dwight preached a sermon. I don't know, maybe it was Easter time like this is. But he preached a sermon that I remember a line appearing in. Might even have been the title of the sermon. I'm sorry, Dwight, I'll have to tell you, I don't remember the sermon. I don't remember the text. I don't remember the illustrations. In fact, I don't remember much of anything except that one line. That one line is the only thing I remember, but it's the one thing I couldn't forget. Because it became like a seed planted in my mind and heart that today is bearing fruit in these thoughts. Now you'll have to wait for the line. Because first we have the backstory, and then scene one, and then scene two. So let's start with the backstory. The backstory of Joseph of Arimathea. Arimathea was a town in the world of Jesus and Joseph that we're not sure of the location for. In fact, scholars and archaeologists have puzzled about it. If you go to Bible dictionaries and look for Arimathea, you'll find that many of them say we're not certain of the location. And they'll mention one or two or three places that are possible. And then one of them might say, by the way, in church history, Eusebius and Jerome said Arimathea was the same as Ramah in the Old Testament, the birthplace of the prophet Samuel. But bottom line, we're not sure. Joseph of Arimathea. Now, we're much more sure about Joseph. We know because the gospel writers write about Joseph. We know, for example, that Luke tells us that Joseph was a good man, had a good heart. In fact, we know he was a follower of Jesus, though John will tell us that Joseph was a secret follower of Jesus because he feared the religious repercussions. And then Matthew is among those who will tell us, from whom we'll read today, that Joseph was a rich man, a wealthy man. Now that meant something in the world of Joseph in many different ways. But for today's purposes, it meant this. Joseph could make plans for himself and for his family, for whenever he, as the poet put it, walked off this mortal coil. In other words, he could plan for what would happen when he passed away. Now, in his day and time, that wasn't like in our time. We get in the car and drive down to the mortuary and ask them about their pre-planning and are shocked at the cost and then go withdraw our life savings and try to pay for it. It wasn't like that. In Joseph's world, people tended to be buried one of two ways. In fact, archaeologists tell us that the hillsides around Jerusalem during Joseph's times were excavated over and over to dig the graves, the common graves of most people. But then there were the privileged few, the elite, Joseph of Arimathea. Joseph had the coin that he could afford to go find sculptors and gravediggers and tell them exactly what he wanted. And they could dig it, carve it out of the rock, get it ready, so that he could have the confidence that when the time came, not only he, but his family could have a place for their, quote, eternal rest. Now, it was right as I was typing those words in my sermon document that a couple of sentences came back to me. I think, Dwight, they might be from your sermon. It seems as I remember you describing Joseph going in to inspect the tomb when it was done. It would have been a large entrance. There would have been more than one room. Inspecting the work that was done, because how people went into the afterlife was very important in that day and time. Knocking on the stone wall, solid, unbreakable. Joseph could be more at peace now because the future was taken care of. That's the backstory. Now the curtain rises on scene one. Scene one, we will read from the words of Matthew, the gospel writer named Matthew, from the next to last chapter of his gospel, chapter 27, almost at the end of the chapter, starting with verse 57. As evening approached, Joseph, a rich man from Arimathea who had become a follower of Jesus, went to Pilate and asked for Jesus' body. And Pilate issued an order to release it to him. Joseph took the body and wrapped it in a long sheet of clean linen cloth. He placed it in his own new tomb, which had been carved out of the rock. Then he rolled a great stone across the entrance and left. Both Mary Magdalene and the other Mary were sitting across from the tomb and watching. The next day, on the Sabbath, the leading priests and Pharisees went to see Pilate. They told him, "Sir, we remember that deceiver once said while he was still alive, 'After 3 days I will rise from the dead.' So we request that you seal the tomb until the 3rd day. This will prevent his disciples from coming and stealing his body and then telling everyone that he was raised from the dead. If that happens, we'll be worse off than we were at first." Pilate replied, "Take guards and secure the tomb as best you can." So they sealed the tomb and posted guards to protect it. Calvary did something to Joseph of Arimathea. Remember John? He was a secret follower. But somehow the Calvary experience ripped the mask off of Joseph, and his fear was gone now. Having been certified that Jesus had indeed perished on the cross, you can almost picture him in your mind's eye. Rich robes swirling, bejeweled sandal feet sending up puffs of dust. He strides to Pilate's palace, demands an audience. He's just ushered into Pilate's weary presence. Pilate is sick of this man, sick of Jesus, sick of the leaders. What do you want now? And Joseph makes what must have seemed to Pilate an absurd request. "Please, sir, give me his body so that I can bury it." Consistent with the realities and the culture of his day, Pilate would likely have responded and said, "What are you thinking about? Bury him? Why would we bury him? You know what we Romans do. The dogs, the vultures need fed. We cast them out. What are you talking about burying him? I want to bury him." "Where are you going to bury him?" "I have a tomb." "A tomb? Not just in a common grave there on the mountainside?" No, sir. A tomb." "What kind of tomb?" "It's my tomb, my family tomb. It was just finished." "You're talking one of the big tombs, several rooms for the entire family." "Oh, yes, sir, yes, and a rolling stone to cover it." What is wrong with you? Have you seen the mangled body? It's been reported to me he's nothing but blood. He'll ruin your tomb. Oh, no, sir, please. Give him to me. Pilate must have thought about it for a moment, but then ultimately said, fine, take him, he's yours. You'll mess up your tomb, but at least he won't break it. Not if it's of stone. And the curtain falls on scene one. The curtain rises again, this time on the second and the final scene, again in the words of Matthew's Gospel. This time the first 7 verses of Matthew 28. Matthew writes, "Early on Sunday morning, as the new day was dawning, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary, we just saw them at the tomb, went out to visit the tomb. Suddenly there was a great earthquake, for an angel of the Lord came down from heaven, rolled aside the stone, and sat on it. His face shone like lightning, and his clothing was as white as snow. The guards shook with fear when they saw him, and they fell into a dead faint. Then the angel spoke to the women. 'Don't be afraid,' he said. 'I know you are looking for Jesus who was crucified. He isn't here. He is risen from the dead, just as he said would happen. Come see where the body was lying. And now go quickly and tell his disciples that he is risen from the dead, and he is going ahead of you into Galilee. You will see him there. Remember what I have told you.'" When we loan things, we want to get them back in one piece. Okay, so you can borrow my textbook. You got to buy your own, but you can borrow mine to study for the quiz, but don't be writing in it. It's my textbook. Yeah, I guess you can take the car, but I just had the oil changed, just had it washed and detailed. Don't be driving on any dirt roads. Hey, be careful. That's Mom's gift. Don't drop it. Don't break it. You can look at it. We're sometimes willing to loan things, but don't break them. And that brings me to Dwight's line. Sitting there in that pew, Pioneer Memorial Church, listening to this young pastor. Was it the line in his sermon or the title in the bulletin? Here's what it was. He broke what he borrowed. He borrowed it and he broke it. Joseph's new tomb. Secure, sealed, stone, unbreakable. And the two Marys slip into the early morning dawn, hastening their way toward the tomb, only to find that the tomb has been broken, the stone has been moved, and the grave has been shattered. He broke what he borrowed. You know, it turns out that there are some things that you can't really trust to Jesus. Some things you can't give to him, offer to him, loan to him, and have the trust that they'll stay intact. Your final goodbyes, don't trust them to Jesus. They may not be so final. Your last resting place, let me know how that works out for you. Your sealed tomb, unbreakable. Dwight said it well. He broke what he borrowed. Because death cannot hold him. The grave cannot contain him. The legions of hell cannot restrain him. Why? 3 words. He is risen. Last night, those of you who joined us left our Good Friday service maybe with your eyes blurred with the tears of the cross and the tomb. Went home much more solemn than normal, waiting in those moments what Christ followers throughout the ages have done. Wait and wait. But today we're back at the tomb because there's something unfinished. The story is told about Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. Mozart at that time was living with his father Leopold in Vienna. Mozart, maddeningly talented, frustratingly indolent at times, at other times loved to play mischief, especially on his aging father, who himself was a musician. So the story says that Mozart at times would come home from a riotous evening of partying and celebration with his friends, only to find his father fast asleep upstairs. And despite the fact that his father was fast asleep, Mozart would sit down at the piano and begin, of all things, to play scales. I used to hate to practice scales. He would begin to practice scales loudly, and he would start up the piano, practicing his scales loudly, higher and higher, until reaching the upper registers, reaching the final end, the last part of his scales exercise, and then would stop with the last note unplayed. Then he'd go up to bed. Well, it seems that those scales haunted old Leopold. He was a musician. Somehow into his dreams and his imagination, the music penetrated, and he heard the scales moving up the piano, all the way till that last note wasn't heard. And it is said that finally old Leopold would drag himself out of bed, stumble down the stairs, and play the last note. Had to be finished. We leave Good Friday with that last note hanging. We come to Easter and find that he broke what he borrowed, and when he did that, he hit the note. And now our lives that might be disordered, our hopes that might be crushed, our futures that might be in question, suddenly can find rest. Because he rose, our task is not to worry, not to fret, not to fear. It's simply to wait. Because one day the Christ who broke the tomb will break every tomb, and we will hear the final trumpet and live again. That is the message of Easter. Gracious God, thank you that, as Dwight put it so many years ago, he broke what he borrowed. Thank you that Jesus played the last note, and now we wait for his return. In his name, amen.